All right, let's talk about a number you've probably heard 1,000 times, a statistic that really drives a huge global conversation, the gender pay gap. But what if the way we usually talk about that number is, well, missing the point? Today, we're going to break down a perspective that challenges that whole common narrative. Let's get right into it. You know this figure. For every dollar a man earns, a woman makes, on average, 77 cents. It's powerful, it's easy to remember, and it has become, a cornerstone of the conversation about equality in the workplace. But here's the thing. Is that 77-cent figure the whole story? That's the big question we're digging into. The source we're looking at today argues that to really get what's going on, you have to look way, way deeper than just this one number. So let's start right there with that 77-cent statistic, because to really understand the critique, we first have to get a handle on what this number actually is, and maybe more importantly, what it isn't. It's the foundation of the popular story, so it's our starting point. Okay, so here's the first big idea from our source. That 77-cent figure is what's called an uncontrolled average. What does that even mean? Well, it means it's calculated by just taking the earnings of all working women and dividing them by the earnings of all working men. It's a huge 30,000-foot view, not a close-up comparison of a man and woman doing the exact same job. So if it's just a raw average, what's the big deal? Well, the argument we're exploring is that this creates a seriously incomplete picture. And when you leave out that much context, that picture can become pretty misleading. In fact, the source we're examining doesn't pull any punches. It calls the continued use of that 77 cents figure misleading. Now, the argument isn't that the math is wrong. It's that the conclusion so many people jump to, that the 23-cent gap is all because of discrimination for the exact same work, just isn't what the data shows when you start to peel back the layers. So why does this number have such incredible staying power? According to this analysis, its strength is its simplicity. It's an unforgettable number that's super effective at creating an emotional response, and driving support for certain political goals. And this brings us right to the absolute core of this whole perspective. If the 77-cent number is an incomplete picture, then what exactly is it leaving out? Let's dig into the missing context. That, according to this argument, really changes everything. So the crucial missing pieces, this analysis says, are the millions of individual choices and the complex economic realities that shape our careers. These are things that have a massive impact on how much we earn, but are totally invisible in that raw 70-cent average. And we're talking about some really big factors here. Things like different career and industry choices. Think a social worker versus a petroleum engineer. It includes the total number of hours people work, how many years of uninterrupted experience they have, their education level, and even a person's willingness to take on dangerous or high-risk jobs that often pay a lot more. The whole argument is that once you start factoring these variables in, a huge chunk of that pay gap starts to make a lot more sense. Okay, so if the raw average is like comparing apples to oranges, what's the alternative? This perspective says we need a true apples-to-apples comparison. But what does that really look like? Here's the difference in a nutshell. Over on the left, you've got that raw average we've been talking about. But on the right, that's the controlled comparison this analysis is pushing for. This is where you compare, say, a male and a female architect, both with 10 years of experience, both working 45 hours a week at the same firm. In other words, you control for all those other variables we just talked about. And here it is. This is the punchline of the whole argument. According to this source, when economists actually do these controlled like-for-like comparisons, that 23-cent gap shrinks dramatically. We're talking down to just a few cents. Now, it may not vanish completely, but it paints a totally different picture from the one we get from that 77-cent statistic. So where does all this leave us? If the raw number isn't the whole story, what's the path forward? Well, according to this analysis, it means we have to shift the entire conversation away from just one single statistic. The call here is for a more nuanced discussion, and what that really means is moving past a single flashy headline and digging into the complicated web of factors. Some are personal choices, some are societal pressures, some are just economic realities that affect careers and earnings for everybody. So what does that actually look like? This perspective suggests a pretty clear three-step approach. First, you have to acknowledge the powerful role that personal choices and different life priorities play. Second, you got to factor in the hard economic realities of different jobs and industries. And third, you have to commit to moving beyond these oversimplified headline-grabbing stats to get to the real, messy, complex heart of the issue. Ultimately, the perspective we've walked through today is calling for a pretty fundamental shift in how we talk about this topic. It's a call to look past the single headline and actually engage with all the complex details underneath. And that really leaves us with one final crucial question. How can we all have a better, more data-driven, and in the end, a more productive conversation about what equality in the workplace really looks like? Thanks for watching.